Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Surya Prakash Upadhyay from Indian Institute of Technology, Mandi. Today we are going to talk on module Metropolis and Small Towns from paper Sociology of Urban Transformations. This module introduces the difference and continuities between metros and small towns. It discusses the evolution of the concepts and policy around these settlements. Thirdly, the module also discusses the debates and key questions around the size-linked phenomenon. Metropolis and small cities, small towns, both are divided or are understood on the basis of size zone. So the metropolis or megapolis and a small town, these represent two polar ends of the urban settlement spectrum in India and elsewhere in the developing world. For a very long time, urban thought in developing countries focused around the metros due to their predominance and the unprecedented scales of growth that were not experienced by the world so far. A concomitant of this preoccupation with metros was an overlooking of the small towns that represent a significant chunk of urbanization. Small towns remain overall neglected in studies of urbanization in developing countries and in India particularly. They also remain neglected in public discourse, imagination, and policy. There has been a recent upsurge in interest in small towns and in understanding their distinct culture features in terms of social structure, politics, economic drivers, built environment, and development trajectories. In fact, in this paper, Sociology of Urban Transformations, we have developed more than 3 modules on specifically designed for small towns, and that captures different aspects of small towns like the small town governance, small town cultures, and so on. So this quest is linked to moving away from the understanding of urbanization as a singular mode and understanding the heterodoxies around which the urbanization has developed. So India presents an ideal case to understand the differences, continuities, and interfaces between these settlement spectrums. This is because its settlement trajectory is deep, diverse, and currently posed at an interesting juncture where urbanization is gaining increasing economic and political significance, and where the relative proportions of rural and urban are more or less equal. This module presents these two urban agglomerations as part of an entire spectrum of settlements and introduces the differences, continuities, and evolution of concepts around this size-linked phenomenon. This examination of the polar ends of urban agglomeration is used as an anchor that offers interesting insights into the heterodox urbanizations experienced in the country and the debates and the key questions around these in the context of the current transformations of economy, polity, and society. The metropolis is a term that signifies an agglomeration of small towns, adjacent areas that are roughly conjoined in a functional environment. In the geography of settlements, a metropolis is a class by itself, bringing in a high volume of consumption and large flows of people, goods, services, and information. A megacity, that is, a city with more than 10 million population, is a special form of such geographical conjointness. Megacities are a form of contemporary urbanization. In 1980, there were just 3 megacities in the world. Currently, there are 24 and estimated to grow further. According to the estimations of the United Nations, a bulk of the megacity growth is expected to be in South Asia and Africa. Of the 24 existing megacities in the world, more than half are in Asia and Africa. Further, if one were to look at the fastest growing cities in the last 30 years, the top 20 would be in Asia and Africa, and more than 10 are located in China, whereas 3 in India. The Census of India defines metropolis as a city or agglomeration with more than 1 million population. They are therefore also called million plus cities. There are 53 million plus cities in the country as per the census 2011. Of these, Mumbai, Delhi and Chennai are considered to be the megacities with more than 10 million population. Metropolises epitomize central place theory that argues that a central place offers the advantage of agglomeration and scale. They are economic power houses on account of their size. Agglomeration can amplify production as well as consumption, giving an advantage to both providers of public goods such as transportation, infrastructure, and private service suppliers, as these goods and services can be provided more cheaply and with density. Agglomeration economics is, however, not the sole reason for metros to emerge in the contemporary era. The rise in population in the developing parts of the world, increased rural to urban migration, and the particular development trajectories that concentrate opportunities and resources in large cities are the main reasons for the rise of metropolises in developing countries and their expansion into megacities. On the other hand, the concentration of activity also creates new problems and issues. The sheer scale of these cities dominates over the settlement system and generates political eminence. The developing country context leads a particular edge to the issues of metros, raising concerns about the ability of infrastructure to keep pace with increasing population, weakness of governance paradigms in coping with the complexities involved in large-sized agglomerations, and vulnerability to environmental and other risks linked to the huge environmental and human footprint. These concerns the ability and appropriateness of governance institutions and mechanisms to respond to issues with agility, given the burdens caused by the scale, the huge environmental footprints of the agglomeration and their impacts on the region, and other developments, and the vulnerability of the to issues of terror. Several scholars conclude that most megacities that have emerged in the developing world have passed the tipping point and have become overwhelmed, dangerous, and ungovernable. Metropolitanization, or the culminating of processes that encourage centralization of economic activity and demography, is essentially a product of post-independence period in India. In 1901, there was only 1 million plus city, that is Calcutta in India. It was joined by Mumbai in 1911. Numbers increased to 5 in 1951. The years after independence show an acceleration of this trend, with the number of million plus cities rising to 12 in 1981, 23 in 1991, and 35 in 2001, and now 53 in 2011. 160.7 million persons, or 42.6% of the urban population, reside in these metros as per the census. A recent trend is, however, that the largest metros such as Mumbai, Kolkata seem to register a decline in the rate of growth. This is seen by researchers to be an indication that their populations are stabilizing. According to Ramachandran, metropolitization is essentially a product of centralization of administrative, economic, and political forces in the country. What this means is that large cities have played an important role in integrating the various states in the country through economic opportunities. They have enabled mobility beyond language-based state boundaries. Metropolitanization is also linked to the intense interaction between cities and the integration of the national economy and urban centers into an interdependent system. Metros are economic powerhouses, and estimates that in 2007 and 8, each of the 6 large metros in the country, that is Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Bangalore, Delhi, and Ahmedabad, added to gross domestic product, that GDP, between 20,000 crore and 1,14,000 crore. Further, together they contribute 10% of the GDP of the country. So what are the common themes in understanding metrocentric urbanization? As the primary site for urbanization in India, there has been a considerable amount of research on and in metros. The thinking on metros itself has undergone significant shifts through various phases. We now trace some of these themes and shifts. In phase 1, problematic urbanization in developing countries that run from 1950 to 1970s, the characterization is over urbanization and urban primacy. And here what happens, Indian politicization has emerged as a form of runway growth that cities did not anticipate and were not prepared for. The typical issues thus associated with Indian metros include ineffective planning, large-scale informal developments, large informal economies, and a situation where services and infrastructure keep changing settlements instead of the other way around. These and other issues have received significant attention from researchers and given rise to concepts such as over-urbanization, urban primacy, so on. This conceptual paradigm that drew significantly from the Western experiences of urbanization considered metropolitan growth in developing countries like India equivalent to urbanization, problematized it and the various concomitant issues. What is the optimal settlement size? This is one of the major questions when we talk about the metros. So there is an overwhelming evidence in the literature that shows that cities cannot be allowed to grow indefinitely. Regimes that spur growth need to be restrained. The debates around settlement size revolve around three things. One, limits to the economic benefits of agglomeration. Two, carrying capacity of cities. Three, the ability to manage or govern cities efficiently. Such literature comes from planners, that is Louis Wirth, sociologist Robert Merton, and ecologist and environmentalist Rees. The arguments are several. Very large cities spawn crime and dysfunctionalities and produce ungovernable societies. They have very heavy environmental footprints. Their size makes them unwittingly to manage. From this point of view, metros are big, bad cities which are becoming worse by day. Several scholars from the global south argued that the nature of urbanization being experienced by developing countries was dependent on the developed world. Thus, features such as primacy, over-urbanization, and the huge of numbers in informal work were actually linked to the processes of production and exchange among these countries. In phase 2, that is called as reconsideration of role of urbanization that ran from 1970s to 1990s to the present time, and it is characterized as unevenness is inevitable. That is, and how it translates. In 2009, the World Development Report signaled a new approach toward understanding metros and the related issues of development. This approach, entitled New Economic Geography, that argued that development is necessarily uneven. Certain spaces are more conducive to grow. The uneven gains of such developments can be evened out through a process of migration. This thesis suggests that growth of large cities and metros is to be accepted as inevitable, and policymakers and countries need to be prepared to deal with the same. Since the turn of the millennium, the mainstream discourse has shifted to regard urbanization as positive and metros as representing the engines of economic growth for the country. The new development mantra, based on the postulates of new economic geography and converted by the World Bank into policy prescriptions, is enhance infrastructural investment in cities to enable them to be competitive and attract foreign investment. This shift in discourse has meant that a lion's share of national investment as well as through foreign sources is taken up by the metros. The pace of these transformations seem to be quite rapid and is spread across multiple realms. In the economy, it involves a shift from manufacturing to services and formal to informal jobs. In geography, it implies restructuring of space towards clean and beautiful cities and throwing the poor to periphery. For the society, it includes rising consumption and aspirations of middle class, rising inequality, and declining interaction across social groups. The rapidity of these transformations is underlined by several studies which show that reforms are a slow and uncertain process, and several reforms are not actualized in metros due to legacies of political economies that are embedded in the feudal structures, or due to the uncertainties of circuits capital itself. So if we want to understand small towns from a metrocentric lens, how are we going to understand? As opposed to metros, where the population thresholds have been specified, there is no clear understanding of what is a small town. Popularly called by a variety of terms such as mufsil and kasbas, small towns house about 30% of urban population. They have not received significant attention as the post-colonial period was characterized by the runaway growth of the metros. It is only in the last couple of censuses that small towns and especially census towns have begun to engage the interest of researchers. The 2011 census indicated that compared to 1,363 census towns in 2001, the country now has 3,893 census towns. Thus, more than 2,532 new census towns were added to the country in the last 10 years. After the current census, the growth of small towns has assumed a special interest because they represent one-third of the new urban growth, that is, equivalent to the growth of population in metros and 65% of the growth in urban areas since 2001. For a long time, it was thought that small towns are the shadows of the large metros. There were no distinct drivers for their growth. These macro views of small towns yield a picture that is consistent with the propositions of new economic geography. And according to this model, localities are not free floating islands, and their growth is linked to the spillover effects of the metro economy. Small towns have less diverse economies. Services play a critical role, with manufacturing largely being small scale. Governance and services are poor quality. Poverty is widespread, with few opportunities for mobility and little impetus for change. On the social dimension too, there are few prospects of change. Several studies show that the small towns are characterized by a stronghold of caste, class, and gender. Barbara Harris White in 2003 comments that the masters of the countryside also rule the town. Institutions are more controlled and highly politicized. In a fairly compact society where there is significant familiarity among inhabitants, caste continues to be a dominant principle of organizing life. Patriarchy is a strong face. The local state itself is like an intermediary state, representing a coalition of interests that run through formal systems as well. Organized civil society is rare and oppositional voices are few. So, shall we call small towns as subaltern urbanism? Now, let us understand what is subalternism. Subalternism is a quest, a search for ideas and practices that have the potential to challenge the dominant system and move beyond the counter critique to a possibility of alternatives. It often invokes bottom up, rooted practices in a globally connected world to contest the finance oriented, not dominated. Currently, a group of scholars have proposed small towns as themselves representing a subaltern development. These authors use the term subaltern urbanization to refer to the process of settlement agglomeration that may or may not be recognized as urban and is not dependent on the traditional important town or a planned city. Thus, the authors are seeking to conceptualize urbanization beyond processes of agglomeration defined by the new economic geography. This focused attention on the multiple drivers of urbanization in India and the role of historical factors and local markets, as opposed to the romantic version of a small town as the other of the big bad city, and therefore interested in unchanging character of the small town. This contemporary version of subaltern urbanism embraces the transformation in the small town that may be unruly outside the frame of the large actors such as state and large capital. This paradigm views these small towns as shaping their own destiny in a globalizing world. This is thus an alternate urbanization story that is distinct from the story of Indian urbanization as dependent on top-down global processes. It focuses on the level of a settlement system, subaltern in its conception. So, what are the kind of debate that surround this small town urbanism? One, the definition of urban as in terms of binaries, that is rural and urban. So, through an examination of definitions of urban areas in several parts of the world, we can point out that defining the rural and urban as binaries ignore the overlaps between the two as well as the scales of settlement that are intermediate and have features of both. This particularly applies to the case of small towns as they incorporate features of rural areas as well as those of larger urban areas. Such features include the nature of economies, state of housing, linkages of multiple kinds, culture and aspirations. The critical dimension of this debate for India is that villages have often come to be characterized by the lack of basic resources, while urban areas have resources by default. Further, it points attention to the exchanges and transactions around water, food, labor, recreation, and thus encourages better mutuality rather than one-way extraction and predation by the large cities. There are multiple drivers of urbanization. A large number of census towns are located in the vicinity of metros. As Pradhan shows, even among the new census towns in the proximity of metros, only 13% of the population of new census towns is in the vicinity of a million plus cities. This means that metropolitanization is not an adequate explanation for all the demographic changes in India. Some states like Maharashtra, Delhi, West Bengal show the presence of urban primacy. Their urban structure is top heavy with the presence of megacities at the top of the hierarchy and with urban development occurring along metropolitan corridors. In contrast, states like Punjab, Bihar, Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan show a pattern that is much more diffuse. Gupta, who studied the growth of small and medium towns in Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Haryana, observes that one of the prime drivers for growth is interstate migration. In Haryana, a small town growth overlaps with agricultural development. In Bihar, it reflects the encroachment of human settlements over agriculture, while in Madhya Pradesh, the socio-economic factors show a weak correlation with urbanization. Empirical studies within the states do not suggest consistent finding. For example, Druba demonstrates the growth of outsourcing industry, especially sari embroidery along the NH 117 from Kolkata to its rural west, and thus the emergence of towns in the periphery of Kolkata. However, Chandrasekhar and Sharma suggest that most metropolitan sub-regions retain the bulk of employment. There are others like Ghani et al. Who suggest that industrial growth is moving towards the rural districts. Similarly, studies of towns in Tamil Nadu suggest that several small towns in the state such as Tirupur, Bhavani, Tiruchendur are experiencing rapid growth. There are others like Bhiwandi which are in the vicinity of metros like Mumbai, but whose economies can be seen as a mix of endogenous trajectories. Small towns thus have varied growth drivers, sometimes linked to the immediate regions around them, at other times to direct linkages at national or even international level. However, the diversity of their economies tend to be low. The overall neglect that surrounded the study of small towns and the perceived demographic patterns together contributed to the view that while metros are constantly expanding and changing, small towns are stagnant and unchanging. Several recent studies point to these fairly rapid transitions in both metros and small towns in various realms. Transformations in small towns are linked to changes in agricultural marketing and trade structures, and more gradual changes in accumulation patterns and growing transport and communication connectivity. Prasad documents the changes in political economy of road construction in a small town in Kerala, where the World Bank entered with global tendering and contracts that sought to bypass the local contractors of Izawa caste who emerged in the colonial period. So, in spite of contestations from local capital, multinational capital could sweep aside these claims. These transformations have produced new disconnects in some cases. The Sciallo and Vijay Bhaskar describe the various disconnects in infrastructure and modes of living in a town connected to global economy like Amber in Tamil Nadu, where the town still seems to be caught in poverty, indecent working conditions, and poor infrastructure, while creating islands of global lifestyle in outskirts of the town. Several authors have pointed out the continued importance of household and community relations in the economic practices in small towns, such as Deneve and Barbara Harris White. In Tirupur, Tamil Nadu, for example, the backward class Gaundar community mobilized to enter textiles and gradually emerged as a dominant actor in the economy of the town. In a similar vein, Raman points out the role of internal processes and actors in transformation of Tiruchengandu in Tamil Nadu. These internal processes revolve around caste and other networks. In, in Pasighat in Arunachal Pradesh, Prasad reports that urban politics revolves around indigeneity, that is, who is local and who is not. These changes are better explained by endogenous growth theory, which suggests that long run economic growth is linked to forces internal to an economic system, and particularly those that are linked to opportunities and incentives for technology and innovation. However, the changes are highly circumscribed. Caste is an important aggregator and enables linkages with finance and other forms of accumulation. However, it has also been observed that in industrial towns, the notion of community can embrace the entire town, thereby stretching the boundary of caste. So thus, as D. Neve tells us that Tirupur, whose economy revolves around making t-shirts and other garments, the industry and the population of the town can be seen in terms of a particular caste and the networks that it has been able to generate. Barbara Harris White similarly points out that individuals and communities' location in traditional hierarchies continues to determine their ability to enter a particular economic sector and to accumulate. The rise of the middle class has been particularly conspicuous in small towns, where malls have started registering a presence and mobiles have widened the sphere of connectivity. Small towns are increasingly becoming critical to marketing strategies who see the potential of a huge emerging market in the small towns. In the cultural realm too, small towns and the changes happening therein have captured the interest of filmmakers who see them as located between tradition and change, aspiration and frustration. The recent spate of films such as Queen, Tanu vs Manu, Jo Laga Ke Haisa, or Bunty or Bubbly are illustrative of the same. With all these given things, discussions, now we can contest the urban age thesis. There were less than 3% urban inhabitants on Earth about 300 years ago. In 1995, more than half the world's population became urban, while it is estimated that by the UN that 600 million have been added to this number post 1995. The UN further estimates that 1 to 5 million would be added to the urban population till 2030. These and other foreboding statistics are being deployed with regularity across multiple domains to produce meta-narrative of an urban age. Benner and Shin point out that the idea of the urban age has become the de rigueur frame of reference for everyone concerned, with the importance of cities to be the point of engagement in research, investment, policy, and so on. Attention to small towns point to the number and spread of settlements, though various parts of the country. The findings of the recent census indicate that India is posed at a very crucial juncture. Its settlement structure is deep, complex, and split almost equally between rural and urban and a range of urban. The urban age in India thus appears to be more of a statistical artifact and very chaotic at its core. This raises new questions. Does the current census of India indicate balanced urbanization, or is it an indication of the conservative definitional norms used to define the urban? Is the current settlement balance linked to or in spite of policy? At this juncture, how do we proceed ahead? Will we recognize the importance of several immediate level settlements and pay attention to them as further urban centers, or will be preoccupied with metros? So let us summarize what we have learned in this module. But this summarization is through certain kinds of questions that we need to ask, like, are metros alone connected to global circuits of capital? Are changes in patterns of accumulation confined to metros only? How real is the imagery of rapidly transforming metros? What is the emerging trajectory of urbanization in the country? Is it homogeneous? What are the trajectories of urbanization emerging in the country? Does a similar picture emerge from a metro-centric or a small town-centric analysis? What are the possibilities in these diverse trajectories of becoming urban? Metros and small towns represent two ends of urban settlement spectrum that we have discussed. However, research has been highly biased towards the metro, and thereby we have made some dominant discourses. And attention to small towns begins to suggest not only several new elements of settlement geography, but also the multiplicity of trajectories of urbanization and what it means for the residents of these geographies and how they shape their futures. It contests the unified inevitability of urbanization that is being proposed as a final destination by proponents of the urban age. Thank you.